I stood on the porch of the house I helped pay for my hands, trembling my overnight bag at my feet, staring at a front door that wouldn't open for me anymore. Just hours ago, I had a key. Just hours ago, this was supposed to be my home. I knocked, then harder. I called Michael again and again, nothing. But from inside, I could hear laughter. My son's voice. Lauren's too, like I didn't exist, like I was already gone. That was the moment I realized something I never thought I'd have to face at 67 years old. My own family had locked me out of the life I paid for. If this already hits close to home, please take a second to like this video and maybe subscribe, because stories like this need to be heard. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from and what would you have done if you were standing in my place right then? If you had asked me a year ago what my life looked like, I would have told you it was quiet. Maybe a little too quiet. My name is Diane Cooper. I'm 67 years old, and for most of my life, I did everything the right way. I worked as a school secretary for nearly 4 decades in Columbus, Ohio. I showed up early, stayed late, remembered birthdays, packed lunches, paid bills, and raised my son Michael mostly on my own after my husband passed away 12 years ago. After I retired, the days stretched longer than I expected. Mornings were manageable. I had my coffee watered. My plants watched the news. But afternoons, they had a way of reminding me just how empty a house could feel. The silence wasn't peaceful. It echoed. Michael used to call once a week, sometimes less. He was busy, he'd say. Work, life, responsibilities. I understood that. I always did. Mothers are trained to understand even when it hurts. Then something changed. It started with a Sunday visit. Michael showed up with Lauren and little Sophie, my granddaughter. I remember being surprised I hadn't seen all 3 of them together in months. Sophie ran straight into my arms, laughing, her small hands clutching my sweater like she used to when she was younger. "Grandma, we missed you," she said. I held her tighter than I probably should have. Lauren brought a casserole. Homemade, she said, though I suspected it came from a grocery store. Still, I smiled and thanked her. She was dressed as she always was, perfectly put together, soft neutral tones, hairstyle just right. Lauren had a way of making everything look effortless. That afternoon felt different. Michael lingered longer than usual. He didn't check his phone every 5 minutes. He actually sat at the table and asked me questions about my garden, my neighbors, even my old job. It felt like I had my son back. Then the visits became more frequent. Every weekend, sometimes even during the week, they'd stop by after dinner, bring Sophie over to spend time with Grandma. And suddenly my house wasn't so quiet anymore. There was laughter again, movement, life. I started cooking more, baking again. I even found myself waking up with a little more purpose. Looking back now, I realize how much I needed that, how much I wanted to believe it was real. One evening, about a month into these visits, we were all sitting in my living room. Sophie was playing on the floor with her dolls, and Lauren was flipping through a home design magazine. "That's beautiful," she said, pointing to a page. "Open concept, natural light. It just feels like a real family home, you know?" Michael glanced at me, then back at her. "We've been talking about something," he said carefully. I remember the way my heart skipped just slightly, talking about what I asked. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "About you," he said. "About us, as a family." Lauren set the magazine down and smiled at me, warm, reassuring. "We worry about you being here alone," she added gently. "This house is lovely, Diane, but it's quiet." There it was again. That word, quiet. I gave a small laugh. "Well, I suppose that comes with the territory. But it doesn't have to," Michael said quickly. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something I hadn't seen in a long time, concern. Or at least, what I thought was concern. "What do you mean?" I asked. He hesitated for just a moment, then said it. "What if we bought a house together?" The room went still. Sophie looked up briefly, then went back to her dolls. Lauren leaned closer to me, her voice soft. "A bigger place. Something with space for all of us. You'd have your own suite, private, comfortable. We could have dinners together, holidays, everything. You wouldn't have to be alone anymore." I didn't answer right away, because for a second, I couldn't. It was such a simple idea, and yet it hit something deep inside me, something I hadn't realized was still aching. "You mean live together?" I asked slowly. Michael nodded. "Yeah, like a real family again." The words settled over me like warmth. A real family again. I hadn't heard that phrase in years. "But what about your job, Sophie's school?" I asked, trying to stay practical even as my heart started to soften. "We've been thinking about moving anyway," Lauren said. "Better school district closer to Michael's office. This could solve everything." "And you'd be with us," Michael added. "Not alone out here." I glanced around my living room, the photos on the wall, the worn couch, the familiar corners that had held my life together for so long. Alone. Was I alone? Or had I just gotten used to it? "It's just an idea," Michael said quickly, sensing my hesitation. "We don't have to decide anything right now." But I could see it in his eyes. This wasn't just an idea. They had already thought about it, planned it even. Lauren reached for my hand. "We just want you to be part of our lives, Diane," she said softly. "Really part of it." Her hand was warm, convincing. And in that moment, I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, this was my second chance at the kind of life I thought I had lost when my husband died. A home filled with voices, with laughter, with family. "I'll think about it," I said finally. Michael smiled, relieved, almost eager. "That's all we're asking." But something about the way he said it, the way Lauren exchanged a quick glance with him. It flickered across my mind for just a second. A small, quiet unease, the kind you don't fully understand, the kind you push aside because hope feels so much better. I should have listened to that feeling. I should have asked more questions. But when your own child looks at you and says, "Come live with us, be part of our life again," you don't see danger, you see love. And at 67 years old, I wanted that more than anything. Over the next few weeks, the idea stopped being just a conversation and slowly turned into something that felt real. Michael began sending me listings, beautiful homes in quiet suburban neighborhoods just outside Columbus, large kitchens, wide windows, clean streets lined with trees. Every house seemed brighter than the last, filled with the kind of light I hadn't realized I was missing. "Look at this one," he said one afternoon, sitting beside me at my kitchen table. His phone turned toward me. 4 bedrooms, finished basement. And there's a layout where you could have your own space downstairs. I leaned closer, studying the photos. There it was, a small suite with its own bathroom and a sitting area. "It's perfect," Lauren added from across the table, sipping her coffee. "Private, but still part of the home. You'd have your independence, Diane, but we'd all be together." Independence, together. They made it sound so balanced, so thoughtful. I could already imagine waking up in a new space, hearing Sophie's laughter upstairs, walking into a kitchen where someone else was already making coffee, sitting down to dinner with people who knew me, who wanted me there. It felt like stepping into a life I thought was gone. We'd decorate it just how you like. Lauren continued smiling. "Soft colors, your furniture. We want you to feel at home." I nodded slowly, my chest tightening in a way that felt almost like hope. I don't want to be a burden," I admitted quietly. Michael's expression changed instantly. "Mom, you're not a burden," he said firmly. "You're family." Lauren reached over, placing her hand lightly on my arm. "This is what families do," she said. "We take care of each other." Those words stayed with me. They echoed in my mind long after they left that evening. And little by little, I began to let my guard down. The more we talked about the house, the more detailed Michael became. He wasn't just showing me pictures anymore. He was painting a future. "We'd have Sunday dinners every week," he said one night. "You could cook like you used to. Sophie loves your food." I smiled at that. "And holidays," Lauren added. "Christmas, Thanksgiving, all in one place. No more driving back and forth. No more being alone." That word again, alone. It landed differently now. Because now I could see a way out of it. Michael leaned back in his chair, his tone shifting slightly more practical, more focused. "The market's moving fast, though," he said. "Interest rates are going up. If we're going to do this, we need to act soon." I felt a small flicker of hesitation. "Soon?" I asked. "Yeah," he said. Good houses don't stay available long, and with my work, I'm seeing it every day. People are making offers immediately. Lauren nodded in agreement. We don't want to miss the right opportunity, she added. I folded my hands in my lap, thinking, it all sounded reasonable, logical even, but something about the pace, the urgency, made my stomach tighten just a little. What would that mean? Financially, I asked carefully. Michael didn't answer right away. Instead, he exchanged a quick glance with Lauren. It was subtle, quick enough that I might have missed it if I hadn't been looking directly at them. Then he turned back to me. Well, he said slowly, we've been thinking. Since you sold your house a few years ago, you've got that savings set aside, right? I nodded. Yes, I said, most of it. I've been careful. And I had. That money wasn't just numbers in a bank account. It was years of work, of sacrifice, of saying no to things so I could feel secure later. Michael leaned forward slightly. If we combine resources, he said we could afford something much better, something that works for all of us. Lauren smiled again, that same soft, reassuring smile. It's not about you paying for everything, she said quickly. It's about contributing to a shared future. A shared future. I repeated those words silently in my head. What kind of contribution, I asked. Michael exhaled as if choosing his words carefully. Well, for a house in that area, we'd need a strong down payment. With your savings added in, we could secure something really solid, something long-term. There it was. The first time the conversation turned clearly toward my money, I felt it immediately a shift in the room. Not obvious, not aggressive, but present. Still, I didn't pull back, because everything else about the idea felt so right, and my name would be on the house I asked. It was the one question that mattered most. Michael nodded quickly. Of course, he said. We'll make sure everything is set up properly. Lauren added, absolutely. You're part of this, Diane. Their answers came fast, confident, maybe too confident. I held their gaze for a moment longer than usual, searching for something, anything that didn't feel right. But all I saw were familiar faces. My son, my daughter-in-law, my family. Okay, I said softly. I just want to make sure everything is clear. Of course, Michael said again, smiling. We'll handle all the details during closing. That's when everything gets finalized anyway. Closing, paperwork, processes I didn't fully understand. But he did. That was his job. He worked in mortgages. He knew how these things worked. I told myself that over and over again. He knows what he's doing. You can trust him. In the days that followed, the conversations became more focused, more urgent. Michael started calling me during the day. Hey, Mom, just checking. Have you thought more about the amount you'd be comfortable putting in? Lauren texted me links to furniture decor ideas, even paint colors for my space. It felt like everything was moving forward, fast. Too fast, maybe. But every time I hesitated, they reassured me. Every time I questioned something, they had an answer ready. And every time that small voice in the back of my mind tried to speak up, I quieted it, because doubt didn't feel good, but hope did. One afternoon, I sat alone at my kitchen table, staring at my bank statement. The numbers looked different now. Not just savings, not just security. They looked like possibility. A new life, a new beginning, a home filled with people instead of silence. I ran my fingers along the edge of the paper, thinking about everything that money represented. 40 years of work, late nights, early mornings, raising Michael, losing my husband, starting over. Was I really ready to put all of that into something shared? My phone buzzed. A message from Michael. Mom, we found the one. This is it, but we need to move quickly. Attached was a photo of a house. White exterior, large windows, a front porch that looked like something out of a magazine. It was beautiful. I stared at it for a long time, and somewhere deep inside, that quiet unease stirred again. Just for a moment, then I took a breath and pushed it away. I didn't tell Helen right away, and that alone should have told me something. Helen Brooks had been my closest friend for over 30 years. We met when our boys were in middle school, bonded over PTA meetings, bake sales, and the quiet understanding that comes from building a life one careful step at a time. She'd been there when my husband passed, when I sold the house, when I thought I wouldn't find my footing again. Helen was not the kind of woman who panicked easily. She was the kind who noticed things. And maybe, deep down, I already knew what she would say. Still, secrets have a way of slipping out. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon when she stopped by unannounced, carrying a small bag of fresh peaches from the market. "I was in the neighborhood," she said casually, setting the bag on the counter. "Thought I'd check on you." I smiled, trying to keep things light. "You always say that when you think I'm hiding something." She raised an eyebrow. "Am I wrong?" I hesitated, just for a second, but Helen caught it. She always did. "What's going on, Diane?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. I exhaled slowly and gestured for her to sit. "There's something I've been meaning to tell you," I said. And then I told her everything. About Michael's visits, Lauren's warmth, the house, the plan to live together, the idea of a shared future. At first, Helen didn't say anything. She just listened. Her expression didn't change much, but I could see the way her fingers tightened slightly around her coffee cup. "And they want you to contribute financially?" she asked when I finished. I nodded. "Yes, it's just part of making it work." "How much, Diane?" I looked down at my hands. Most of what I have. The silence that followed was heavier than anything she could have said. Helen set her cup down slowly. "No," she said, just one word, firm, clear. "No." I repeated, a small defensive edge creeping into my voice. "No," she said again. "You don't hand over your life savings without protection, not even to your own child." I felt something tighten in my chest. "It's not like that," I said quickly. "We're buying a house together. My name will be on it." "Will it?" she asked. "Yes," I insisted. "Michael said everything will be handled during closing." Helen leaned back slightly, studying me. "Did you see anything in writing?" I hesitated. "Well, not yet. But that's normal, isn't it?" Her eyes didn't leave mine. "Diane," she said carefully, "nothing about this should be rushed, and nothing should be based on verbal promises when that kind of money is involved." I felt my defenses rise immediately. "They're not strangers, Helen. They're my family. And that's exactly why you need to be careful," she replied. The words landed harder than I expected, because they weren't accusing. They were concerned. And concern is harder to argue with. "I think you're overreacting," I said, though my voice lacked the certainty I wanted it to have. Helen sighed softly. "I hope I am," she said. "I truly do. But I've seen situations like this before. People change when money is involved, even people we trust." "Michael wouldn't do that," I thought instantly. "He's my son. He's been so kind lately," I said quietly. "They both have. They want me to be part of their lives again." Helen's expression softened. "I know you want that," she said gently. There it was. The truth I didn't want to say out loud. I did want it. More than anything, I just don't want you to get hurt, she added. I looked away, because suddenly, I wasn't sure I could promise her that. A few days later, Lauren stopped by in the evening. She brought soup. "Homemade," she said again, with that same easy smile. "You look tired," she said, as she set the container on my counter. "I'm fine," I replied, forcing a small smile, but she stepped closer, her expression shifting into something softer. "Diane, you can tell me anything, right?" Her tone was so warm, so inviting, it almost made me forget the conversation I'd had with Helen. "I was just talking to a friend," I said carefully. About the house, I nodded. Lauren sighed lightly, as if she already knew what was coming. "Let me guess," she said, leaning against the counter. "They told you to be careful." The way she said it, light, almost amused, made it sound like a predictable script. "Yes," I admitted. She smiled, but there was something just beneath it. Something I couldn't quite name. Diane. "People outside the family don't always understand what we're trying to build," she said gently. "They see numbers. We see a life together. A life together, those words again." "They're just looking out for me," I said, though it sounded weaker now. "And so are we," Lauren replied quickly. "Michael loves you. Sophie adores you. We want you with us. Not alone in this house. Alone." The word pressed against something fragile inside me. Lauren stepped closer and reached for my hands. "We're not asking you to give anything away," she said softly. "We're asking you to invest in your family. Invest. It sounded smarter, safer, more reasonable. And everything will be handled properly, I asked, searching her face. Of course, she said, without hesitation. Michael deals with this every day. He knows exactly what he's doing. I nodded slowly. That answer again. He knows what he's doing. Lauren squeezed my hands gently. You trust him, don't you? The question lingered in the air. Simple, but heavy. Because saying no would mean something I wasn't ready to face. Yes, I said finally. I do. She smiled, relief flickering across her face. I knew you would, she said softly. A few nights later, I stopped by their apartment unannounced. I had baked cookies for Sophie and thought it would be a nice surprise. At least, that's what I told myself. The door was slightly open when I arrived. I raised my hand to knock, but paused when I heard voices inside. Michael's and Lauren's. They'll release the funds after closing, Michael was saying. And she won't question it, Lauren asked. She hasn't so far, he replied. We just need to keep things smooth until everything's finalized. There was a brief silence. Then Lauren spoke again, her voice lower. I just don't want any complications. Once it's done, I don't want her lingering. The words sent a chill down my spine. Michael exhaled. We'll handle it. My hand froze mid-air. My heart started pounding. Slow, heavy beats that echoed in my chest. I should have walked in. I should have said something. But instead, I stepped back. Quietly. Carefully. Like someone who had just heard something they weren't supposed to hear. And as I stood there just outside the door, that small, quiet unease I had been ignoring finally began to grow into something I could no longer explain away. Something darker, something dangerous. But even then, I didn't stop. Looking back now, I often ask myself the same question over and over again. At what exact moment did I cross the line from cautious to blind? Was it the day I walked into my bank and requested the transfer? Or was it much earlier, the moment I chose to believe them instead of listening to that quiet voice inside me? The morning I went to the bank was unusually bright. Sunlight streamed through the windows, reflecting off polished floors and glass counters, making everything feel clean, official, safe. I remember thinking how strange it was that something so life-changing could happen in a place that looked so ordinary. Good morning, Mrs. Cooper. The teller greeted me with a polite smile. How can I help you today? I hesitated for just a second. My son and I are purchasing a home together, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I need to transfer funds for the down payment. How much would you like to transfer? I swallowed. $280,000. Even saying the number out loud made my chest tighten. The teller's expression shifted just slightly. Of course, she said, her tone becoming more formal. We'll just need to verify a few things. As she began processing the request, I sat in one of the chairs nearby, clutching my purse a little tighter than usual. This was it. 40 years of work, savings built slowly, carefully, one paycheck at a time, all moving in a matter of minutes. My phone buzzed. A message from Michael. Everything good. Mom, I stared at the screen for a moment before replying, Yes, I'm here now. Almost immediately, another message appeared. You're doing the right thing. This is for all of us. I read that sentence twice. Then a third time, this is for all of us. I let out a slow breath and typed back, I know. But even as I sent it, something in my chest didn't fully settle. The paperwork itself felt rushed, not in an obvious way. No one was hurrying me out the door or pushing documents in my face, but everything moved quickly, too smoothly. Michael met me later that afternoon with a small folder. Just a few standard documents, he said casually, as we sat at my kitchen table. Lauren stood nearby, flipping through her phone, though I noticed she kept glancing over. What are these for? I asked, looking at the papers. Just formalities, Michael replied. Things related to the transaction, disclosures, acknowledgments, standard stuff. The words sounded official, reassuring. But as I scanned the pages, the language felt dense. Legal, complicated. Do I need a lawyer to look at these? I asked almost instinctively. Michael shook his head immediately. No, Mom, that's not necessary. These are routine. Everyone signs them. Lauren chimed in her tone light. If we had to get lawyers involved for every step, we'd never get anything done. They both laughed softly. I forced a small smile. It made sense, didn't it? This was Michael's field. He did this every day. I didn't want to seem difficult or worse, distrustful. Okay, I said quietly. I picked up the pen and I signed, page after page, line after line, without fully understanding what I was agreeing to. Later that evening, Sophie came over while Michael and Lauren ran errands. She sat at the kitchen table swinging her legs as she colored in one of her books. I watched her for a moment, grateful for the simple comfort of her presence. "Grandma," she said suddenly, not looking up from her page. "Yes, sweetheart. Are you really going to live with us?" I smiled. "That's the plan." She paused, her crayon hovering in midair. "Mommy said you might not stay forever," she added casually. The words landed harder than she intended. I blinked. "What do you mean?" I asked gently. She shrugged. "I don't know. I heard her talking to Daddy. She said something about it being temporary. Temporary." The word echoed in my mind. I forced a soft laugh. "Oh, I'm sure she didn't mean it like that," I said quickly. "Sometimes adults say things that don't come out the right way." Sophie nodded, already moving on her attention, returning to her coloring. But I couldn't move on as easily, because that word, temporary, didn't fit the picture they had painted for me. Not at all. That night I sat alone in my living room, the signed documents resting on the coffee table in front of me. I stared at them for a long time. The signatures looked like mine. The handwriting was mine. But the meaning behind it all felt distant, blurred. I picked up my phone and opened my messages with Michael. "You're doing the right thing. This is for all of us. We'll handle everything." Each message sounded reassuring, but together, they felt rehearsed. I shook my head, trying to clear the thought. "No, you're overthinking. They love you. They want you there. That's all this is." Still, I couldn't ignore the way my stomach tightened, the way that small voice, so easy to silence before, was getting louder. The next morning, Lauren called me. Her voice was bright, cheerful. "Good news," she said. "Everything is moving forward. Closing should happen very soon." "That fast?" I asked, surprised. "Yep," she replied. "Michael handled everything perfectly." "Of course he did. That's wonderful." I said, though the word didn't feel as solid as it should have. "We're so excited, Diane," she added. "This is the beginning of something really special." I murmured my agreement, but as the call ended, I found myself staring out the window, lost in thought. Because despite everything, despite the smiles, the promises, the plans, something didn't feel right. Not enough to stop, not enough to question out loud, but enough to linger, like a shadow just behind the light. A few days later, I stood in my empty house packing the last of my belongings. Boxes lined the walls, memories tucked neatly into cardboard, 40 years of life, reduced to stacks and labels. I paused in the doorway of my bedroom, looking around one last time. This house had held everything: love, loss, laughter, grief, and now it was about to become something else entirely. A stepping stone, a transition, a sacrifice for something better. At least, that's what I told myself. I picked up one final box and carried it to the door, and as I stepped outside, locking it behind me for what I thought would be the last time, that quiet voice inside me whispered again, soft, persistent. Are you sure I'd tightened my grip on the box and walked away anyway? The day we moved into the new house felt like stepping into someone else's dream. It was even more beautiful in person than it had been in the photos. The white exterior gleamed under the afternoon sun, the windows wide and welcoming, and the front porch. Oh, that porch looked like something out of a magazine. For a brief moment, standing there with my boxes and my heart full of cautious hope, I thought, maybe everything had worked out after all. "This is it," Michael said, proudly unlocking the front door. Lauren stood beside him, smiling in that effortless way of hers, while Sophie bounced on her toes, already excited to run inside. "Come on, Grandma," she said, grabbing my hand. And just like that, I stepped across the threshold. Our home. That's what I told myself. Our home. The first thing I noticed was how perfect everything looked. The living room was already arranged, decorated in soft, neutral tones. The furniture matched the lighting, was warm, and everything seemed carefully placed as if someone had planned every detail long before I arrived. "Wow," I said quietly, taking it all in. Lauren beamed. "I've been working on the design for weeks," she said. "I wanted it to feel cohesive. Cohesive. It certainly was. But as I glanced around, something small caught my attention. None of my things were there. Not yet, at least. "Where should I put these?" I asked, gesturing to the boxes I had brought in. "Oh," Lauren said quickly, "we'll get to those. For now, let's show you your space." "Your space?" I nodded, following them down a hallway toward the back of the house. Michael opened a door and stepped aside. "Here you go, Mom." I walked in slowly. The room was smaller than I expected. Not tiny, but not what I had imagined either. There was a bed, a small dresser, and a single window that looked out toward the backyard. Off to the side, a narrow door led to a bathroom. "This is it?" I asked before I could stop myself. Lauren laughed lightly. "It's cozy, right?" "And it's just for now," she added quickly. "We can always make adjustments later. Just for now." There was that phrase again. Temporary. I forced a smile. "It's nice," I said. And in that moment, I told myself not to be ungrateful, not to focus on details. This was still better than being alone, wasn't it? The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity. Boxes were carried in. Sophie ran from room to room, claiming spaces as her own. Michael took calls, stepping outside every so often, his voice low and focused. Lauren moved through the house like she owned it, directing, adjusting, correcting. "Those boxes can go in the garage for now," she said, at one point pointing to a stack of my belongings. "All of them?" I asked. "Just temporarily," she replied with a quick smile. "We'll sort through everything later, another word that didn't quite land right. I nodded, though something inside me tightened as I watched years of my life being stacked neatly in a place I didn't have immediate access to. That first evening, we sat down for dinner together. For a moment, it felt exactly like what they had promised. The table was set beautifully. Sophie laughed as she told a story about school. Michael poured drinks, Lauren served food, and I found myself smiling more than I had in a long time. This is it, I thought. This is what I wanted. But even in that warmth, small things began to shift, subtle, almost invisible. Lauren corrected me when I reached for a cabinet. "Oh, we keep those in a different place now." She said, her tone polite but firm. Michael barely noticed. Later, when I offered to help clean up, Lauren waved me off. "You should rest," she said. "You've had a long day." It sounded kind, but something about the way she said it made me feel like I didn't belong in the rhythm of the house, like I was outside of it. Over the next few days, that feeling grew, not all at once, but piece by piece. Michael became harder to reach. He left early for work, came home late, and when he was there, he seemed distracted. His conversations were shorter, more functional. Lauren, on the other hand, was always present, watching, observing, adjusting. "Diane, could you not leave your shoes there?" she said one morning, gesturing toward the entryway. "Oh, of course," I replied, quickly moving them. "And the kitchen, if you could wipe down the counters after using them, that would help maintain the look," she added. The look. I nodded again. Every request was reasonable on its own, but together, they began to feel like rules, guidelines, expectations I hadn't been told about before. One afternoon, I decided to unpack a few of my boxes from the garage. I wanted to make the space feel more like mine. As I stepped into the garage, I paused. There were dozens of boxes, most of them mine, stacked high, unopened, untouched. I found one labeled "Bedroom Personal" and began to pull it toward the door. "Diane." I turned. Lauren stood there, arms crossed, lightly. "Oh, I was just going to bring a few things in," I said. She hesitated, then smiled. "Maybe we should wait until we figure out the final layout," she said. "I don't want things to get cluttered." Cluttered. The word stung more than I expected. "These are just my personal items," I said gently. "I understand," she replied, her tone still calm. "But the house has a certain flow right now. Let's not disrupt it until we've planned everything properly." I stood there for a moment, holding the box. Then slowly, I set it back down. Okay, I said quietly. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The room felt smaller in the dark. Quieter, but not the kind of quiet I was used to. This quiet felt different. Like I was alone, even though there were people just down the hall. I thought about the promises, the shared meals, the laughter, the sense of belonging, and I tried to hold on to them because everything still looked right, sounded right, but felt off. Like I was standing just slightly outside of something I was supposed to be part of, and for the first time since I had stepped into that house. A question formed in my mind that I couldn't ignore. Was this ever really my home? Or had I simply been allowed to step into someone else's, on their terms? At first I told myself it was just an adjustment. New house, new routines, different personalities under one roof. That was normal, wasn't it? Of course there would be a period where everyone had to figure things out. That's what I kept repeating to myself. But the truth is, it didn't feel like adjustment. It felt like displacement. Lauren changed slowly. Or maybe she didn't change at all. Maybe she just stopped pretending. It began with small things, corrections that came more frequently with less softness. Diane, could you not use that pan? It scratches too easily. Diane, I already organized the fridge. Please don't move things around. Diane, Sophie has a schedule now. We're trying to keep things structured. Each sentence was delivered with a polite tone, measured, controlled, but underneath, there was something else, something that didn't feel like inclusion. It felt like ownership. One morning, I woke up early, as I always had. Old habits don't fade easily. I went into the kitchen, quietly making myself a cup of coffee. The house was still wrapped in that peaceful silence I used to know so well. For a moment, it felt comforting, familiar. I sat at the table, watching the light slowly filter through the windows. Then Lauren walked in. She paused when she saw me. "Oh," she said, her voice neutral. "You're up early." "I've always been an early riser," I replied, with a small smile. She nodded, opening a cabinet. "We've been trying to keep mornings calm for Sophie," she said. "Less noise, less movement." I blinked. "I was being quiet," I said gently. "I know," she replied quickly. "I just think it's better if we all stick to the same rhythm." The same rhythm. I looked down at my cup. It was just coffee. Just a moment of peace. And somehow, it felt like I had done something wrong. Michael, on the other hand, became distant. Not openly, not in a way that anyone else would notice. But I did, because I knew him. He used to sit with me, talk about his day, ask about mine. Even if it was brief, there was always some connection. Now, there were gaps, silences, half-listened responses. "Michael, do you have a minute?" I asked one evening as he walked past me toward the stairs. "Can it wait?" he said, not stopping. "I've got a call." "Of course," I replied. But the minute never came, and after a while, I stopped asking. I tried to focus on Sophie. She was still the one bright, unfiltered presence in the house. She didn't hide her affection. She didn't measure her words. She would sit beside me, tell me about school, show me her drawings, ask me questions about when her dad was little. With her, I felt like myself again. But even that began to shift. One afternoon, we were sitting together in the living room working on a puzzle. Sophie leaned closer to me and whispered, "Grandma, why doesn't Mommy like when you touch things?" I froze. "What do you mean?" I asked carefully. She shrugged. "She always fixes stuff after you move it. Like the pillows and the kitchen things." I glanced around the room, at the perfectly arranged cushions, the untouched surfaces, the controlled order. "I think your mom just likes things a certain way," I said softly. Sophie frowned. "But it's your house too, right?" The question hit me harder than anything Lauren had said. I opened my mouth to answer, but nothing came out, because for the first time, I didn't know if it was true. That evening, I overheard something that unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. I had gone to the hallway to get a glass of water when I heard voices coming from the kitchen. Michael and Lauren. They didn't know I was there. "She's starting to settle in too much," Lauren said, her voice low but sharp. "She just moved in," Michael replied. "What do you expect? I expect us to stay on track," Lauren said. "We had a plan." "Plan." The word made my chest tighten. Michael sighed. I know, just give it time, and the rest she pressed. There was a pause. Then Michael said quietly, I'll handle it. The rest. That phrase again. I stood there just out of sight, my heart beating louder than their voices. What rest? What were they talking about? More money, more control, or something else entirely? I stepped back before they could see me moving quietly down the hallway. But their words followed me, echoed in my mind. We had a plan. The next few days, I tried to act normal. I smiled. I stayed out of the way. I followed the unspoken rules. But inside, something had shifted. I was no longer just uncomfortable. I was aware. Aware of the way Lauren watched me when she thought I wasn't looking. Aware of the way Michael avoided certain conversations. Aware of the fact that this house didn't feel like mine. Not really. One afternoon, I tried again to bring some of my belongings in from the garage. Just a few things, a photo frame, a small lamp, pieces of my life, things that made me feel grounded. I had just placed the lamp on the dresser when Lauren appeared in the doorway. She didn't say anything at first. She just looked. Then she smiled. It's a bit crowded in here now, she said lightly. I turned toward her. I thought it might make the space feel more like home, I said. She tilted her head slightly. It already is home, she replied. We just need to keep things balanced. Balanced. I nodded slowly. But as I looked around the room, at the few small items I had managed to place, I couldn't help but feel something pressing in on me. A quiet realization. This wasn't about balance. It was about control. And I was starting to understand something that terrified me more than anything else. I hadn't been invited here as an equal. I had been allowed in, on conditions I didn't fully understand, conditions that were still unfolding, and whatever the rest was, I had a feeling it hadn't come yet. By the time Michael finally brought it up again, I already knew something was coming. You don't hear phrases like, we had a plan, and the rest without feeling it settle somewhere deep in your bones, waiting, watching, and eventually revealing itself. It happened on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Sophie was at a friend's house, and for once the house felt still, not peaceful, just still. Lauren was in the living room scrolling through her phone while Michael sat across from me at the dining table tapping his fingers lightly against the wood. That nervous habit. I remembered it from when he was a teenager. Back then it meant he had something to ask for. Mom, he said, finally clearing his throat. Can we talk for a minute? I folded my hands in my lap. Of course. Lauren looked up but didn't say anything. She just watched. Michael leaned forward slightly. So, I've been reviewing everything related to the house, he began. The mortgage, the taxes, some of the adjustments we need to make now that we're settled in. I nodded, waiting. And there are a few additional costs we didn't fully anticipate, he continued. There it was, the setup. What kind of costs, I asked. Renovations mostly, he said. Some structural updates, minor things, but they add up. And also Sophie's school zoning, it's more expensive than we initially thought. Lauren chimed in smoothly, as if the words had already been rehearsed. We want to make sure everything is perfect for her future, she said. This house is an investment in her life, too. I felt my chest tighten slightly. I understand, I said carefully. But what does that have to do with me? Michael hesitated, just for a second. Then he said it. We were hoping you could help cover some of those additional expenses. I stared at him. I already gave you almost everything I had, I said quietly. I know he replied quickly, and we're incredibly grateful for that. This is just temporary support, a little extra to help stabilize things. Temporary. There was that word again. It didn't sound temporary anymore. It sounded like a pattern. How much, I asked. Michael glanced at Lauren before answering. We don't have an exact number yet, he said, but we were thinking maybe accessing your emergency funds, just to bridge the gap. My heart skipped. My emergency funds, I repeated. Yes, he said gently. The account Dad left. You mentioned it once. I hadn't meant to mention it, not really. It had slipped out in a moment of conversation back when everything still felt safe. That's not part of this, I said, my voice firmer now. Lauren leaned forward slightly. "Diane, we're not asking you to give it away," she said softly. "We're asking you to help your family." The way she said it made it sound like refusal would be selfish, like saying no would mean I didn't care. "I've already helped," I said, "a lot." Michael rubbed his forehead. "I know, Mom, I do. But we're in this together now. That's what this was supposed to be. Supposed to be." The words lingered, because suddenly, I wasn't sure we were talking about the same agreement anymore. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation in my head, every promise, every reassurance, every moment I had chosen trust over doubt. And now, here we were. They wanted more. Not because something had gone wrong, but because they expected it. Because somewhere along the way, my willingness to give had turned into something else, an assumption. The next morning, Lauren approached me again. This time she was more direct. I was thinking, she said, leaning against the doorway of my room, "It might be easier if we had access to some of your documents." I sat up slightly. "What kind of documents?" "Nothing major," she replied casually. "Just your updated mailing address, maybe copies of your identification, banking information, things like that, for what I asked. "So we can keep everything organized under one household system," she said. "It's easier that way. Easier for who I didn't say it out loud, but I felt it. I'd rather keep my personal documents with me," I said carefully. Lauren's smile didn't disappear, but it changed, just slightly. "I understand," she said, "but if we're going to manage things as a family, transparency is important." Transparency. Another word that sounded reasonable until you looked at how it was being used. "I'm not comfortable with that," I said quietly. There was a pause, a brief moment where neither of us spoke. Then Lauren straightened her tone, cooling just a fraction. "All right," she said. "We'll figure something else out." But the warmth was gone, and I felt it. That afternoon, I called Helen. I hadn't planned to, but my hands moved before my mind could stop them. "Diane," she answered. "Is everything okay?" I hesitated. "No," I said finally. "I don't think it is." And then I told her everything. The conversation about more money, the request for documents, the way things felt off. Helen didn't interrupt. She just listened. And when I finished, she said something that made my stomach drop. "You need to talk to a lawyer," she said. "A lawyer," I repeated. "Yes," she said firmly, "before this goes any further." I closed my eyes. "I don't want to turn this into something bigger than it is," I said. "It already is bigger than you think," she replied. Her voice wasn't harsh, but it was certain. "They're pushing boundaries, Diane, financial, personal, and you're letting it happen because you're afraid of losing them." Her words cut deeper than I expected, because they were true. "I just wanted a family again," I whispered. "I know," she said gently, "but not at the cost of losing yourself." That night, I sat in my room surrounded by the few things I had been allowed to keep close. The rest of my life, still in boxes, still out of reach. I thought about everything that had happened, the promises, the pressure, the subtle shifts, and for the first time, I allowed myself to ask the question I had been avoiding. What if this was never about sharing a life? What if it was about taking mine? From down the hall, I could hear Michael and Lauren talking again, their voices low, controlled, careful. I couldn't make out the words this time, but I didn't need to, because I already knew. Whatever the rest was, they weren't done asking for it. And I wasn't sure how much more I had left to give. The night I left the house, I told myself it was temporary. Just one night. Just a little space to clear my head, to breathe without feeling watched, measured, or quietly pushed toward decisions I wasn't ready to make. Michael and I had argued earlier that evening, if you could even call it an argument. It wasn't loud. There were no raised voices, just a conversation that left me feeling smaller with every word. "You're making this harder than it needs to be, Mom," he had said, his tone controlled, almost tired. "I'm asking questions," I replied. "That's not unreasonable. We're trying to build something here," he insisted. "But it only works if we trust each other." Trust. The word had started to lose its meaning. "I trusted you," I said quietly, "when I gave you everything I had." Lauren stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching us. "No one forced you to do that, Diane," she said. The words were calm, careful, but they landed like something sharp. I looked at her, then back at Michael. "I didn't say you forced me," I replied. "I said I trusted you." Michael exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "This isn't going anywhere," he said. "Maybe we all just need a little time to cool off." And just like that, the conversation ended. No resolution, no reassurance, just distance. I packed a small bag that night. A change of clothes, my medication, a few personal items. Not because I thought I wouldn't come back, but because something inside me told me I might need to. Helen didn't ask questions when I called. "Come over," she said, "right now." And I did. Her house felt different, warm, uncomplicated. There were no rules I didn't understand, no invisible lines I had to be careful not to cross. We sat in her kitchen drinking tea late into the night. I told her everything again, but this time with less hesitation, less defense, more honesty. "I think they want more money," I admitted. "I think they want control." Helen corrected gently. I didn't argue, because at that point, I wasn't sure she was wrong. "Stay as long as you need," she said, but I shook my head. "I'll go back in the morning," I replied. "We need to talk, properly." She looked at me for a moment, then nodded. "All right," she said, "but I'm coming with you if you need me." I smiled faintly. "I'll be okay." I believed that, or at least, I wanted to. The next morning, I drove back alone. The sky was overcast, the kind of gray that made everything feel heavier than usual. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed something immediately. The curtains were drawn. That was unusual. Lauren always liked natural light. She said it made the house feel alive. I grabbed my bag and walked up to the front door. Everything looked the same white paint, the same polished handle. The same house I had walked into just days before believing it was mine, too. I reached into my purse and pulled out my key, the one Michael had handed me with a smile. "Welcome home, Mom." I slid the key into the lock, turned it. Nothing. I frowned, adjusting my grip. Tried again. Still nothing. A small, uneasy feeling crept up my spine. Maybe I was doing something wrong. Maybe the lock was stiff. I pulled the key out, looked at it, then tried again, this time slower. The key went in, but it wouldn't turn. My heart started beating faster. I knocked lightly. "Michael," I called. Lauren, no response. I knocked again, louder this time. "It's me, Diane." Still nothing. I reached for my phone and called Michael. Once, twice, 3 times. Each call went straight to voicemail. A cold feeling settled in my chest. I stepped back slightly, glancing at the windows. And that's when I heard it. Laughter. Faint, but unmistakable. From inside the house. Michael's voice. Lauren's, too. Clear enough to know they were there. Close enough to know they could hear me. But the door remained closed. I knocked again, harder now. "Michael," I called out, my voice rising despite myself. "I know you're in there." The laughter stopped. Silence fell, heavy, deliberate. I stood there, my hand still raised, my heart pounding in my ears. Then, a soft mechanical sound. A click. Not the door unlocking, but something else. I looked up. The small security camera above the door had shifted slightly, pointing directly at me, and then Lauren's voice came through. Not from behind the door, but from the speaker. Cold, controlled. "Diane, we think it's best if you stay somewhere else for a few days." I froze. What I said, barely able to process the words. "You've been upsetting the household," she continued calmly. "We need some space." I stepped closer to the door. "My things are inside," I said. "My medication, my clothes, everything." "We'll arrange a time for you to collect them," she replied. "Arrange a time. Like I was a stranger. Like I didn't belong there. This is my home," I said, my voice trembling now. "I live here." There was a brief pause. Then Michael's voice came through, but it didn't sound like the son I knew. "Mom, just go back to Helen's for now," he said. "We'll figure this out later. Later, always later." I pressed my hand against the door. "Michael, open the door," I said. Silence. "Please," I added, softer now. Nothing. No movement, no footsteps, no sign that anyone was coming. Just that camera watching me, and the realization slowly, painfully settling in. I wasn't being asked to leave. I had already been removed, locked out from a house I helped pay for from a life I thought I was part of. I stepped back slowly, my legs feeling weaker than they should have. The bag at my feet suddenly felt heavier, not because of what was inside, but because of everything that wasn't. My documents, my memories, my security, all behind that door. And I was standing outside it, alone, at 67 years old, with nowhere to go except the one place that still felt safe. Helen's house. But as I turned away, one thought echoed louder than anything else. This wasn't sudden. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was the plan. For a few minutes after I stepped off that porch, I couldn't feel anything. Not anger, not fear, not even sadness, just emptiness. Like my mind had gone quiet in a way that didn't feel natural. Like it was trying to protect me from understanding what had just happened. I stood by my car staring at the house. That house. The one I had helped pay for. The one I had walked into believing I was part of something. Now it looked different. Not warm, not welcoming, just closed, cold, final. My hands were shaking when I reached for my phone. I didn't call Helen, not yet. Instead, I dialed 911. Even now, I'm not entirely sure why. Maybe because I thought there had to be some kind of mistake, some kind of misunderstanding that someone in authority could fix. 911, what's your emergency? I hesitated. I think I've been locked out of my home, I said slowly. There was a brief pause on the other end. Are you in immediate danger, ma'am? No, I replied, but all of my belongings are inside and I live here. All right, we can send an officer to assist. Please stay where you are. Stay where you are. I almost laughed, as if I had anywhere else to go. The patrol car arrived about 15 minutes later. 2 officers stepped out, one younger, one older. The older one approached me first. Ma'am, you're the one who called. Yes, I said quickly. Thank you for coming. I explained everything. At least, as much as I could without sounding like I was losing my grip on reality. I contributed to the purchase of this house, I said. I live here. My son and his wife are inside and they won't let me in. The officer nodded, his expression neutral. Do you have any documentation showing your name on the property, he asked. The question hit me harder than anything else had so far. My documents are inside, I said. I just moved in. He glanced at his partner, then back at me. Let's see if we can talk to them, he said. I nodded, relief flickering just a little. Maybe this would fix it. Maybe they would open the door, explain, apologize, make it all make sense. The officer knocked firmly on the door, not like I had, confident, authoritative. It took a moment, then the door opened. Michael stood there. For a second, our eyes met, and I saw something I didn't recognize. Not guilt, not hesitation, just distance. Sir, the officer said we received a call regarding a dispute. This woman states she lives here and has been locked out. Michael didn't look at me again. She doesn't live here, he said calmly. The words hit like a physical blow. Yes, I do, I said immediately. Michael, what are you saying? He kept his gaze on the officer. This is my home, he continued. My wife and I own this property. She came by earlier and got upset, but she doesn't reside here. I stared at him. My own son, saying those words like they were nothing, like I was nothing. That's not true, I said, my voice shaking now. I moved in. My belongings are inside. I gave you the money for this house. The officer raised a hand gently. Ma'am, let's keep things calm, he said. Then he turned back to Michael. Do you have proof of ownership, he asked. Michael nodded. One moment. He stepped inside briefly, then returned with a folder. Of course he did. He always had everything ready. He handed the documents to the officer. The officer reviewed them carefully, then passed them to his partner. They exchanged a look, and in that moment, something inside me began to break because I already knew what they were about to say. The older officer turned back to me. Ma'am, according to these documents, the property is legally owned by Mr. and Mrs. Cooper. I blinked. That's not possible, I said. My name was supposed to be included. Is it listed anywhere here, he asked gently. I looked at the papers, at the lines, at the names. Michael Cooper, Lauren Cooper, that was it. No Diane Cooper, no trace of me, nothing. There must be something else, I said quickly. The money, I transferred the money. That counts for something. The officer's expression softened. Do you have documentation showing the nature of that transfer? He asked. My documents are inside, I repeated, my voice smaller now. Michael spoke again, his tone steady. The money she's referring to was a gift, he said. To help us with the down payment? A gift. The word echoed in my ears. No, I said immediately. That's not what it was. Ma'am, the officer said, carefully, without documentation indicating otherwise. Financial contributions can legally be interpreted as gifts. I shook my head. No, that's not what we agreed to. But even as I said it, I realized something. We hadn't agreed. Not in writing, not in anything that mattered legally, just conversations, promises, trust. The officer handed the papers back to Michael. I'm sorry, ma'am, he said, but this appears to be a civil matter. We can't force entry or override property ownership. Civil matter, that's what it was. On paper, clean, simple, resolved, but inside me, nothing about it felt simple. This is my mother, I said, my voice breaking now. She knows I live here. Michael finally looked at me again, and for a moment, I searched his face. For anything, a flicker of doubt, of regret, of recognition. But there was nothing. Mom, he said quietly, you need to calm down. Calm down. I let out a small disbelieving laugh. Calm down, I repeated. You're making a scene. Lauren added from behind him. I hadn't even seen her step into the doorway. She stood there now, perfectly composed, watching me, judging me, like I was the problem, like I was the one who didn't belong. I just want my things, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. We'll arrange a time, she replied. That phrase again, so controlled, so distant, like I was scheduling an appointment, not asking for access to my own life. The officer stepped closer to me. Ma'am, do you have somewhere safe to go? He asked. Safe. The word felt strange now, because I thought I had been safe. Right here with my family. Yes, I said slowly. I have a friend. He nodded. That's good. I recommend you go there for now and consider seeking legal advice. Legal advice. The phrase settled into place. Cold, necessary, real. I nodded, though I wasn't sure I fully felt it yet. The officers left shortly after. Michael closed the door. And just like that, it was over. No shouting, no dramatic ending, just a quiet, devastating shift. I stood there for a long moment, looking at the door, the house, the life I thought I had stepped into. And then I turned away, because there was nothing left for me there, nothing I could reach, nothing I could claim, except one truth. I had given them everything, and legally, it meant nothing. I don't remember the drive back to Helen's house. Not clearly. I remember turning the key in the ignition. I remember the sound of the engine. I remember stopping at red lights that seemed to last longer than they should have, but everything in between felt blurred, like my body was moving through the world without me. By the time I pulled into Helen's driveway, my hands were still gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my fingers had gone numb. I didn't even realize I was crying until I tried to open the car door and my vision wouldn't clear. Helen opened the door before I even knocked. She must have been watching for me. One look at my face, and she knew. Oh, Diane, she said softly. That was all it took. Everything I had been holding in the shock, the confusion, the humiliation, it all came crashing down at once. They said it's not my house, I whispered. Helen didn't ask questions. She just pulled me into her arms and held me. And for the first time since I stood on that porch, I let myself break. It took a while before I could speak properly again. We sat at her kitchen table, the same place where everything had still felt uncertain, just a day before. Now, it felt painfully clear. They had documents, I said, staring down at my hands. My name isn't on anything. And the money, Michael told them it was a gift. Helen's expression hardened. Of course he did, she said quietly. I didn't mean it that way, I insisted. We talked about it. We agreed verbally, she interrupted gently. Not legally. The words stung. Not because they were harsh, but because they were true. I trusted him, I said, my voice barely holding together. He's my son. Helen reached across the table and took my hand. I know, she said. And that's exactly what they used. I closed my eyes. Because hearing it said out loud made it real in a way I couldn't avoid anymore. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then Helen stood up and walked over to a drawer near the counter. She pulled something out and returned to the table. A business card. She slid it toward me. "His name is Richard Lawson," she said. "He's an attorney I used to work with. Smart, careful, and more importantly, he doesn't let things like this slide." I stared at the card. The name meant nothing to me. But the idea behind it, that meant everything. "I don't want to turn this into a legal battle," I said quietly. Helen didn't respond right away. Instead, she studied me for a moment. Then she said something I will never forget. "They already did." The words landed with a weight I couldn't ignore, because she was right. This wasn't something that might become a conflict. It already was one. I was just the last person to accept it. The next morning, I sat in Richard Lawson's office. The space was quiet, organized, filled with shelves of files and framed degrees that spoke of years of experience I didn't have. He was in his early 50s, composed, observant, the kind of man who listened more than he spoke. I told him everything, from the first visit, to the promises, to the money, to the door that wouldn't open. He didn't interrupt. He didn't react visibly. He just took notes, carefully, precisely. When I finished, he leaned back slightly in his chair. "All right," he said calmly. "Let's start with what we know." I nodded, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. "You transferred a significant sum of money to your son," he continued. "Do you have records of that transaction?" "Yes," I said quickly. "From the bank." "Good," he replied. "That's important." A small flicker of hope. Then he continued. "Now, did you sign any documents related to that transfer?" I hesitated. "Yes," I admitted. Michael said they were standard forms. "Do you have copies?" "No," I said. "They're in the house." He nodded slowly. "All right. That complicates things slightly, but not irreparably. Not irreparably." I held on to that phrase, like something solid in the middle of everything that felt like it was falling apart. "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means we need to reconstruct the transaction," he said. "Intent matters. Context matters. And if there was any form of misrepresentation, that matters most. Misrepresentation." The word sounded clinical, but what it meant was something much more personal. "They told me my name would be on the house," I said. "They said we were buying it together." "Did they ever put that in writing?" he asked. I shook my head. "No." He nodded again, unsurprised. "That's not uncommon in situations like this," he said. "Situations like this." I didn't like the way that sounded, like I wasn't the first, like there were others. "How bad is it?" I asked quietly. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he leaned forward slightly. "Let me ask you something," he said. "Did your son have any financial difficulties that you're aware of?" The question caught me off guard. "I don't know," I said. "He never mentioned anything." Richard studied me for a moment. Then he said, "In cases like this, there's often more beneath the surface. Debt, pressure, motivations that don't get discussed openly." I felt a chill run through me, because suddenly, pieces began to shift. The urgency, the timing, the way everything had moved so quickly. "What are you saying?" I asked. "I'm saying we need to look deeper," he replied. Later that afternoon, after I returned to Helen's house, I sat alone in the guest room staring at the ceiling. My mind was racing now, not numb anymore, not empty, just full. Full of questions, full of memories that suddenly looked different. Things I had ignored, things I had dismissed, things that didn't make sense before, but were starting to now. And then, something surfaced, a memory. Faint at first, then clearer, a conversation from years ago, with my husband. We'd been sitting at the kitchen table going over finances. He had looked at me serious in a way that wasn't like him. If anything ever happens to me, he had said, "Don't move everything into one place without checking first." I had laughed it off at the time. "You think I don't know how to manage money?" I teased. He smiled, but there was something behind it. "Just promise me," he said. "I promise," I replied. I had forgotten about that. Until now. And then, another piece. "There's someone you should talk to if you ever feel unsure," he had added. "A friend of mine. Margaret Hale." Margaret Hale. The name echoed in my mind. I sat up slowly. because for the first time since everything fell apart, I realized something. Maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as unprotected as they thought. That night I didn't sleep. Not because of fear, not this time, but because something inside me had shifted. For days I had been reacting, trying to catch up with what had already happened, trying to make sense of something that had been carefully planned without me. But now, for the first time, I was thinking ahead. And it started with one name: Margaret Hale. The next morning, I found an old address book tucked inside one of the few boxes I had managed to bring with me to Helen's house. It was worn at the edges, filled with handwritten names, numbers, little notes from years of keeping track of people who had mattered, friends, neighbors, colleagues, and there, near the middle of the book, I found it. Hale Margaret. A phone number, no address, no explanation, just a name and a connection to my husband. My hands trembled slightly as I picked up my phone. I hesitated, because dialing that number meant something. It meant I was finally stepping into a part of my life my husband had tried to prepare me for, without ever fully explaining why. I took a breath and pressed call. She answered on the third ring. "Hello." Her voice was calm, measured. "Is this Margaret Hale?" I asked. "Yes, it is. Who's calling?" My throat tightened slightly. "My name is Diane Cooper," I said. I was married to Robert Cooper." There was a pause. Not long, but long enough to feel. "I've been expecting this call," she said. The words sent a chill down my spine. "Expecting," I repeated. "Yes," she replied. "Robert told me that if anything ever went wrong, you might reach out." I sat down slowly, because suddenly, this wasn't just a coincidence. This was something he had planned. "I think something has gone very wrong," I said quietly. "I thought it might," she said. Her tone wasn't surprised. It was prepared. "Can you come see me?" she asked. "Yes," I said immediately. She gave me an address just outside the city. "I'll be there within the hour," I said. "I'll be waiting," she replied. Margaret Hale's home was modest, not large, not extravagant, but there was something about it, something steady, grounded, like the kind of place where nothing existed by accident. She opened the door before I knocked. A woman in her early 70s with sharp eyes and a calm presence that immediately made me feel like I was standing in front of someone who understood more than she said. "Diane," she said softly. I nodded. "Yes." She stepped aside. "Come in." We sat in her living room, sunlight filtering through the windows. For a moment, neither of us spoke. She simply studied me, not in a judgmental way, but in a way that felt careful, like she was piecing something together. "You look exactly how I imagined you would," she said finally. I let out a small, uncertain laugh. "I'm not sure if that's a good thing. It means Robert was right about you," she replied. That caught my attention. "What did he say?" I asked. Margaret leaned back slightly. "He said you were kind," she said, "loyal, and that sometimes you trusted people more than you should." The words hit closer than I expected. I looked down. "He wasn't wrong," I admitted. "No," she said gently. "He wasn't." I told her everything, from the house to the money to the door that wouldn't open. She listened just like Richard had. Quiet, focused. But unlike Richard, there was something personal in her expression, something that told me this wasn't just information to her, it was confirmation. When I finished, she nodded slowly. "He saw this coming," she said. My heart skipped. "What do you mean?" Margaret stood up and walked over to a cabinet in the corner of the room. She opened it, reached inside, and pulled out a thin folder. Then she brought it back and placed it gently on the table in front of me. "Your husband came to me about 3 years before he passed," she said. I stared at the folder. "What is this?" I asked. "Protection," she replied. I looked up at her. "Protection from what?" She held my gaze. "From exactly what's happening now." My hands trembled as I opened the folder. Inside were documents. Official, structured, detailed. I didn't understand all of it at first, but I understood enough. "This is a trust," I asked. Margaret nodded. "Yes. A protected financial structure your husband set up quietly outside of your main accounts." I blinked. I didn't know about this. That was intentional, she said. Why, I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Margaret didn't answer immediately. Instead, she chose her words carefully. Because your husband had concerns about Michael, she said. The room felt suddenly smaller. Concerns, I repeated. Yes, she said. Financial behavior, risk-taking, decisions that suggested instability. I shook my head slightly. He never told me that. He didn't want to hurt you, Margaret said gently. But he saw patterns, and he was worried that if something ever happened to him, you might become vulnerable. The words settled deep. And he was right, I whispered. Margaret didn't argue, because she didn't need to. I looked back down at the documents. How much is in this? I asked. Enough, she said. Enough to ensure you're not dependent on anyone who doesn't have your best interests at heart. My breath caught, because for the first time since everything had fallen apart, I felt something I hadn't felt in days. Security. Not complete, not perfect, but real. They don't know about this, I said. Margaret shook her head. No, and they were never meant to. We sat in silence for a moment, then I asked the question that had been building in my mind since I walked through her door. Do you think they planned this? I asked. Margaret didn't hesitate. Yes. The word landed clean, sharp, final. From the beginning, I asked. Most likely, she said, or at the very least, they recognized the opportunity early and shaped their actions around it. I closed my eyes, because hearing it said that clearly, left no room for doubt, no space for excuses, no possibility that this was a misunderstanding. This was intention, calculated, patient, precise. And Michael, I asked. My voice broke slightly on his name. Margaret's expression softened, but her answer didn't. He knew, she said. Tears slipped down my face before I could stop them. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet, steady, because that truth was the hardest one to accept. Not Lauren, not the situation, but my son, knowing, participating, choosing. Margaret reached across the table and placed her hand gently over mine. Diane, she said softly, what happened to you was not an accident. I nodded slowly. I know. And what happens next, she continued, is entirely up to you. I looked down at the folder, at the protection my husband had left behind, at the one thing Michael and Lauren didn't know existed. And for the first time since I stood on that porch, I wasn't thinking about what I had lost. I was thinking about what I still had, and what I was going to do with it. Because they may have thought they took everything from me, but they were wrong. They had only taken what I gave them. And now, I was done giving. I didn't tell Richard everything right away. Not about the trust, not about Margaret, not yet. Because for the first time since everything had unraveled, I understood something clearly. Information was power, and for days I had been the only one without it. Now that had changed. When I returned to Richard Lawson's office the following afternoon, I carried myself differently. Not stronger, not yet, but steadier, more aware, more careful. He noticed it immediately. You look like you've found something, he said as I sat down. I met his gaze. I might have, I replied. He didn't press. That told me a lot about him. Instead, he leaned back slightly. Let's continue building what we can prove, he said. That's what matters most. I nodded. Because he was right. This wasn't about what I felt. It was about what I could show. We started with the timeline. Every conversation, every transfer, every moment that had led to that locked door. Richard wrote everything down, organizing it into something structured, something usable. When did the initial discussion about the house begin? He asked. About 3 months ago, I said. They started visiting more often, spending time with me, bringing Sophie. He nodded, jotting it down. Increased contact, emotional reinforcement. The way he phrased it made something click in my mind. Emotional reinforcement. That's exactly what it had been, not just visits, not just kindness, but a pattern designed to build trust. Then they introduced the idea of a shared home, I continued. Said I wouldn't be alone anymore. Promise of security, he noted. And then they rushed the process, I added. Said the market was moving fast. Pressure tactic, he said. Each piece, labeled, defined, turned into something clearer than it had ever been in my own mind. They asked about my savings, I said, suggested combining resources. Financial targeting, he replied. The words were clinical, but the meaning behind them was anything but. As we went deeper, more details surfaced. Things I had dismissed before, things I had explained away. Now, they looked different. Clearer, darker. They avoided putting anything in writing, I said. He nodded. That's significant. I signed documents, I added. But I didn't fully understand them. Do you remember anything specific about what you signed? He asked. I closed my eyes, trying to recall. Disclosures, acknowledgments, something about the nature of the transfer, I said slowly. His pen paused. That could be critical, he said. My stomach tightened. Critical how if those documents framed your contribution as a gift, he said they may attempt to argue that you voluntarily relinquished any claim. They already are, I said quietly. He nodded. Then we need to challenge that interpretation. That's when I told him. Not everything, but enough. There may be additional financial context they weren't aware of, I said carefully. His eyes narrowed slightly. Go on. My husband had concerns about Michael's financial behavior, I said. Before he passed. Richard leaned forward slightly. That's important, he said. Did he ever document those concerns? I believe so, I replied. And I may have access to something that supports it. I didn't mention the trust directly. Not yet. But I saw the shift in Richard's expression. Interest, focus, strategy forming. If we can establish a pattern of concern, he said it strengthens the argument that you were misled, especially if they concealed information from you. Misled. The word felt accurate. More accurate than anything else. Because this wasn't just about money, it was about what I had been made to believe. Over the next few days, we built the case piece by piece. Richard requested bank records, text messages, call logs, anything that showed the progression of events. Helen helped me gather what I could. Screenshots, old messages, even voicemails I hadn't thought to revisit. And when we listened to them, the tone was unmistakable. Mom, this is for all of us. We'll handle everything, you can trust me. Each message on its own sounded harmless, but together, they told a story, a very different story. Then came the messages from Lauren. Richard read them carefully, his expression tightening slightly. She's very precise with her language, he said. Yes, I replied. She always has been. He pointed to one message. Once everything is finalized, we can start adjusting the living arrangement. I felt my chest tighten. I didn't think anything of that at the time, I said. You wouldn't have, he replied. But in context, it suggests intent. Intent. There it was. The word that changed everything. A few days later, something unexpected happened. Sophie called me. It was the first time since everything. I hesitated before answering, but I couldn't ignore her. Grandma. Her small voice came through. My heart softened instantly. Sophie, I said gently. Hi, sweetheart, I miss you, she said. The simplicity of it broke something inside me. I miss you too, I replied. There was a pause. Then she said something that made my breath catch. Mommy said you're not coming back. I closed my eyes. I don't know yet, I said carefully. Another pause. Then quietly, they talked about it before we moved, she said. My eyes opened. What do you mean, I asked. They said, once the house was ours, things would be easier, she continued, and that you wouldn't stay long. The room felt like it tilted. Sophie, when did you hear that? I asked softly. A long time ago, she said, before we came to your house all the time, before everything. I swallowed hard. Thank you for telling me, sweetheart, I said gently. I just want you to come back, she whispered. Tears slipped down my face. I know, I said, I know. When I told Richard about the call, his reaction was immediate. That's significant, he said, very significant. She's just a child, I said. I don't want to involve her in this. We're not involving her, he replied. But her statement supports a timeline of premeditation. Premeditation, the word echoed in my mind. Because that's what this was. Not a misunderstanding, not a moment of bad judgment, but a plan, formed, refined, executed. That night I sat alone in Helen's guest room again, but this time, I wasn't staring at the ceiling in confusion. I was thinking clearly. For the first time, every piece now fit together. The visits, the warmth, the urgency, the pressure, the documents, the door, all of it. One continuous line, leading to exactly where I was now. And for the first time, I stopped asking why, because I already knew. What mattered now was what came next, because they didn't just take my money, they didn't just take my home, they took my trust. And that was something I was no longer willing to let go unanswered. The first time I saw Michael again after everything, it wasn't in a living room, it wasn't across a dinner table, it wasn't as a mother sitting across from her son. It was across a conference table, with attorneys present, and nothing left to hide. Richard Lawson sat beside me, calm as ever, a folder neatly organized in front of him. Across from us, Michael and Lauren sat together, their own attorney beside them. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence felt different from the ones before. This one wasn't uncertain. It was charged, heavy with everything that had already happened and everything that was about to. Michael glanced at me briefly. Just a flicker. Then he looked away. Lauren didn't look at me at all. She sat upright, composed her hands folded neatly, her expression unreadable. If I hadn't known her, I might have believed she was calm. Richard broke the silence. "Thank you all for coming," he said evenly. "We're here to address a dispute regarding financial contributions, property ownership, and potential misrepresentation." The words sounded formal, clean, but underneath them was everything that had been torn apart. Their attorney nodded. "We're prepared to listen," he said. Richard turned slightly toward me. "Mrs. Cooper, would you like to begin?" My hands rested in my lap steady, not because I wasn't nervous, but because something inside me had already settled. "I gave my son $280, 000, I said. My voice didn't shake. "I did it because I believed we were purchasing a home together. I was told my name would be included. I was told I would live there as part of the family." I paused. And then I was locked out. The words landed in the room, heavy, unavoidable. Michael shifted slightly in his seat. Lauren remained still. Their attorney spoke next. "Our clients maintain that the funds in question were a voluntary gift," he said. "There is no written agreement indicating shared ownership." I looked at Michael. Finally. Fully. "Is that what you believe?" I asked. He hesitated. Just for a second, then he nodded. "Yes," he said. The word didn't hurt the way I expected it to, because by then, I already knew who he had chosen to be. Richard opened his folder. "Let's look at the timeline," he said. He began laying out the evidence, step by step, message by message, call by call, the visits, the discussions, the promises. Each piece on its own might have meant nothing, but together, they told a story. A very different story from the one Michael was trying to present. "Notice the progression," Richard said. "Increased emotional engagement, followed by financial discussion, followed by urgency, followed by documentation lacking full disclosure." He slid a printed message across the table. Lauren's words. "Once everything is finalized, we can start adjusting the living arrangement." Their attorney read it carefully. Michael didn't. Lauren's expression shifted, just slightly. Then Richard placed another document down. Bank records, transfer confirmations. "This was not a casual gift," he continued. "This was a structured financial contribution tied directly to a shared living arrangement." Their attorney leaned forward. "That interpretation is subjective," he said. Richard didn't react. "Then let's discuss intent," he replied. And that's when everything changed. He turned to me. "Mrs. Cooper, you mentioned a conversation your granddaughter had with you recently." I hesitated, just for a moment. Then I nodded. "She told me that before they moved, they had already discussed that I wouldn't be staying long." The room went quiet. Their attorney frowned slightly. "That's hearsay," he said. Perhaps Richard replied calmly, "but it aligns with documented behavior and communication patterns." He leaned back slightly. "And it raises a very important question. He turned his attention directly to Michael and Lauren. When exactly did you decide that Mrs. Cooper would not be a permanent resident of the home she helped fund? Neither of them answered. Michael's jaw tightened. Lauren looked down at the table. Silence stretched, longer than before, and in that silence, something became clear, not just to me, but to everyone in that room. Their attorney cleared his throat. "We're not here to assign intent," he said. "We're here to resolve a financial dispute. Intent is central to that resolution," Richard replied. Then he leaned forward slightly. "And there's more. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment everything shifted." Richard looked at me briefly, a silent confirmation. I nodded, and he continued. "We have reason to believe that Mr. Cooper was under significant financial pressure at the time of this transaction," he said. Michael's head snapped up. "That's not relevant," their attorney said quickly. "It is," Richard replied, "if financial distress influenced the representation of this agreement." He placed another document on the table. "Not the trust, not yet, but enough. Credit reports, debt indicators, patterns." Lauren's composure cracked first, just slightly, but enough. "This is private information," she said, "and yet it directly relates to motive," Richard responded. Michael leaned back in his chair, exhaling sharply. "This is ridiculous," he said. "We bought a house. She helped. That's it." "That's not it," I said. My voice cut through the room, clear, firm. For the first time, completely unafraid. "You didn't just take my money," I continued. "You built something around it, a story, a promise, a future that never existed." Michael looked at me again. And this time, there was something there. Not regret, but pressure cracking through. "You don't understand what we were dealing with," he said. "There it is," Richard said quietly. Michael froze. "What were you dealing with?" I asked. He hesitated, then looked away. Lauren spoke instead. "We had financial obligations," she said carefully. "This house was an opportunity to stabilize things." "At my expense," I replied. She didn't answer, because she didn't need to. The room shifted again, this time in my favor. Not because I had proven everything, but because the truth was no longer hidden. It was there, in the silence, in the hesitation, in the things they couldn't say without revealing too much. Their attorney leaned forward. "Let's talk resolution," he said, because he knew, just like everyone else, that this wasn't going to hold, not cleanly, not without consequence. The negotiation that followed wasn't emotional, not on the surface. It was numbers, terms, conditions, but underneath it was everything, every betrayal, every lie, every moment that had led here. And in the end, they didn't win. Not completely. Not the way they thought they would, because the pressure, the evidence, the risk of what could come next was too much. They agreed to terms: financial restructuring, partial recovery, legal acknowledgement of contribution. Not everything, but enough. Enough to prove that what they had done wasn't invisible. When the meeting ended, Michael stood up slowly. For a moment, it felt like he might say something, anything. But he didn't. He just walked away. Lauren followed, without looking back. I remained seated for a moment longer, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to feel it. The shift, the end of something, and the beginning of something else. Not victory, not satisfaction, but clarity. Because in that room, I finally saw the truth, not just about them, but about myself. I had given everything, not because I was weak, but because I believed, and now I was no longer willing to pay the price for that belief. As I stood up, Richard gathered the documents. "You handled that well," he said. I nodded. "I finally understood what I was dealing with," I replied, and that made all the difference. I didn't go back to the house. Not after the meeting, not after the agreement, not even after everything was settled on paper. Because by then, I understood something I wish I had known much earlier. Just because you can go back doesn't mean you should. A few weeks later, the legal process finalized. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't everything I had lost, but it was enough. Enough to restore some of what had been taken. Enough to stand on my own again, and most importantly, enough to remind me that I still had control over my life. Richard handled everything with precision, making sure every term was documented, every detail accounted for. They won't try this again, he told me. I believed him, not because Michael had changed, but because now I had. Helen helped me find a small place on the outskirts of Columbus. It wasn't large, it wasn't grand, but it was mine. A modest cottage-style home with a small front yard and a community garden just a short walk away. The first time I stood in front of it, keys in my hand, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not excitement, not even happiness, but peace. A quiet, steady kind of peace that didn't depend on anyone else. Moving in was different this time. There were no promises, no expectations, no carefully constructed visions of a shared future. Just me, my belongings, my choices. Helen stood beside me as I opened the door. "You ready?" she asked. I smiled. For the first time in a while, yes. We stepped inside together, and it felt right. Not because it was perfect, but because it was honest. The days that followed were simple. I unpacked slowly, one box at a time, each item finding its place not according to someone else's idea of balance or design, but according to what felt natural to me. My photos went on the walls. My books filled the shelves. My kitchen became mine again. There was no one correcting me, no one watching, no one deciding what belonged and what didn't. And in that quiet, I began to rebuild something I hadn't realized I had lost. Myself. Sophie called me again a few days after I moved in. I didn't hesitate this time. "Grandma," she said softly. "Hi, sweetheart," I replied. "Mom said you moved," she said. "I did," I answered. "Can I come see you?" she asked. My heart tightened. "Of course you can," I said gently. "Anytime." There was a pause. Then she said something that stayed with me. "I like it when you smile again." I closed my eyes for a moment, because I hadn't realized how much that had changed. "I like it too," I whispered. Michael never called, not to apologize, not to explain, not even to check if I was all right, and strangely, that hurt less than I expected, because by then, I understood something clearly. Closure doesn't always come from the people who hurt you. Sometimes it comes from accepting who they've chosen to be. I thought about him often, not with anger, not anymore, but with a kind of quiet understanding. He had made choices, not mistakes, choices, and those choices had consequences, not just legally but personally, because somewhere along the way, he had lost something far more valuable than money. He had lost me. Lauren, on the other hand, never reached out, not once, and that didn't surprise me, because she had never really been part of my life. Not truly. She'd been part of a plan, a role, a performance, and once the plan shifted, so did she. Margaret called me a few weeks later just to check in. "You sound different," she said. "I feel different," I replied. "That's good," she said. "Robert would be glad to hear that." I smiled softly. "I think he knew I would get here eventually," I said. "He did," she replied, "and he made sure you had what you needed when you did." I looked around my small living room, at the quiet, at the life I was rebuilding. He did more than that, I said. He gave me a second chance. Sometimes, in the evenings, I sit on my front porch with a cup of tea. The neighborhood is quiet, peaceful. Children play in the distance. Neighbors wave as they pass by. It's not the life I imagined, but it's real, and that makes all the difference. I still think about that day, standing on the porch of that house, the key in my hand, the door that wouldn't open. At the time, it felt like the end of everything. But now, I see it differently. It wasn't the end. It was the moment I was forced to see the truth, the moment I stopped believing in something that was never real and started building something that was. At 67 years old, I lost a house, I lost money, I lost the version of my family I thought I had. But I didn't lose myself. Not completely, because in the end, I chose to take that back, piece by piece, step by step, until I was standing in a place that no one else controlled, a life that no one else could take from me. And if there's one thing I know now, it's this: love should never cost you your dignity. Trust should never replace your judgment. and family is not defined by who shares your blood, but by who shows up, with honesty, with care, and with respect. I may not have the life I thought I wanted, but I have something better now, something stronger, something real. I have peace, and for the first time in a long time, that's enough. At some point in life, many of us are taught that love means sacrifice, that being a good mother, a good parent, a good person means giving everything you have without question. But what this experience taught me is something very different. Love without boundaries can become self-betrayal. Trust, when given without clarity, can be used against you. And no matter how close someone is to you, even family, you still have a responsibility to protect yourself, especially as we get older, especially when the world starts to assume we are more vulnerable, because vulnerability should never be mistaken for weakness. I gave my life savings to my son because I believed in him, because I believed in us, and while that belief was broken, it did not break me. What saved me was not just the legal help or the financial recovery. It was the moment I stopped trying to fix what they had done and started choosing myself instead. So if you're watching this and you've ever been in a situation where your kindness was taken for granted, where your trust was used, or where you felt like you had to give everything just to be loved, I want you to ask yourself one question. What would happen if you chose yourself? Not out of anger, not out of fear, but out of self-respect. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is not hold on. It's to let go and rebuild on your own terms. Tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my place? And where are you watching from today? If this story meant something to you, please like and subscribe, because there are more stories like this. Stories about truth, strength, and finding your way back to yourself.